Good afternoon and welcome. I welcome everybody who is with us to this Albert and Liese Eckstein Scholar in Residence lecture. I'm Professor Chava Samuelson, and I'm the director of the Center for Jewish Studies at Arizona State University, and Irving and Miriam Lowe Professor of Modern Judaism. The Center for Jewish Studies at ASU is a unique hybrid of an academic program and a research center. We serve as an intellectual resource for all aspects of the Jewish experience through the ages, covering diverse philosophical, theological, and political perspectives that bear on the study of Judaism. We offer undergraduate and graduate courses, research conferences, public lectures and exhibits, and we foster critical inquiry and scholarly engagement with all aspects of the Jewish experience. Most recently, that's January 25th, we held an international research workshop on anti-Semitism in comparative perspective, new directions and research trends. It was organized by two faculty members, Professor David Sirocki and Professor Lenka Bustikova. This conference highlighted our historical, interdisciplinary, and contemporary approach to the study of anti-Semitism. And in November 2020, we featured Professor Cheryl Greenberg from Trinity College, who delivered the lecture on Jews, race, and civil rights in the United States. Now, the Eckstein lecture this afternoon will combine both of those aspects. As you realize, we are on Zoom. We are doing this virtually because of COVID-19. On the one hand, COVID-19 pandemic has caused us to cancel all events in person, but on the other hand, it enables us to reach a much larger audience by doing this online. A major vehicle of our programming has been the annual Albert and Liese Eckstein Scholar in Resident Lecture in Jewish Studies. The lecture was named after Dr. Albert and Mrs. Liese Eckstein, who came to Phoenix in 1936 and who were instrumental in shaping Jewish communal life here in Phoenix. Dr. Eckstein was a major presence in Jewish life of Phoenix and Arizona in general in his role as owner of the Jewish life of Jewish News, as well as his work in medicine. He was a lover of books and a lifelong learner, as was his wife, Liese, who was a highly educated person, woman who was deeply involved in Hadassah and various other educational projects. In their memory, the extended Eckstein family established a generous fund that has enabled Jewish studies to introduce to the community of Phoenix leading Judaica scholars who inspire all of us here in Phoenix to learn more about Judaism, whether it's Jewish history, Jewish arts, Jewish social life, Jewish culture, and so forth. The Center for Jewish Studies at ASU is very grateful for the Eckstein family's steadfast support of Jewish studies and their leadership role in the Jewish community in Phoenix. I would like to invite now Dr. John Eckstein to welcome all of the attendees of this webinar on behalf of the Eckstein family. John, please.
Well, thank you, Chava. Far be it from me to ever correct you, but my parents actually came to Phoenix with two little boys in 1944 from Fort Benning, Georgia. And it was Flo and Diane's father and mother who took over the Phoenix Jewish News. Ooh. And then, of course, Flo ran the Jewish News for, 150 years or so. And in any event, just those two corrections.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's all right. Well, again, I don't know about all of you out there, but to me, it seems just a little different this year. I do know that this is the 32nd annual Albert and Liese Eckstein Scholar in Residence Community Lecture, and I'm happy to welcome everyone attending, even though I can't see or hear you at all. 1 year ago, and indeed for the past 10 years, we physically gathered maskless and sat just 1 foot apart rather than 6 feet apart in the main auditorium of the Arizona Jewish Historical Society in Central Phoenix. So yes, the Eckstein lecture this year is different. And yes, the past year has just been a little different too, as I'm sure all of you would agree. Who would have thought that new words, symbols, and actions would jump to the top of our daily existence and just roll off our tongues? Words, symbols, and actions like pandemic, coronavirus, spike protein, Zoom, masks, social distancing, hand washing, variants, ventilation, and yes, even the word impeachment. But most importantly, the one word and the one question is when. When can we hug and shake hands again? When can we gather and pray together again? When can we go to a concert, a play, or a movie together again? Root for our favorite sports teams again? Travel again? When will we ever get our vaccines? And most importantly, when will this ever end? You know, the foundation of Buddhism and Buddhist philosophy is that nothing is permanent in our lives and in this world. Everything changes, and including, they change sometimes in just seconds, including our gazillion thoughts. But unfortunately, it seems that the scourge of anti-Semitism, although frequently changing throughout the centuries, seems to occupy a permanent position in human life for almost 3,000 years, ever since Abraham decided to take his walk south, and then subsequently wherever Jews chose or were forced to settle down. Why is that? Why us? Will a significant portion of humanity ever stop hating Jews? I'm sure that Professor Gurock will address some of these questions in his lecture tonight by helping us to understand the history of anti-Semitism in the United States as seen through the lens of organized sports. So once again, on behalf of the entire Eckstein family, near and far, I welcome all of you to the Albert and Liese Eckstein Community Lecture under the auspices of the Jewish Studies program at ASU, led by our outstanding Regents Professor, Hava Tarosh Samuelson. So Hava, the Zoom camera and spotlight are back on you to introduce our distinguished scholar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, and I'm sorry for my mistake. That really should not have happened, but we soldier right on. So our invited Eckstein scholar in resident speaker this afternoon is Professor Jeffrey Gurock, who is the Libby M. Klaperman Professor of Jewish History at the Bernard Revel Graduate School of Jewish Studies at Yeshiva University in New York. He's the author or editor of 22 books, including one title I'll mention, A Modern Heretic and a Traditional Community. The subtitle is Mordechai M. Kaplan, Orthodoxy and American Judaism. That's Columbia University Press. And it was awarded in 1998, the Sol Wiener Prize from the American Jewish Historical Society for that year's best book in the field. This is not the only book that was award-winning. In 2012, New York's more recent book, Jews in Gotham, New York Jews in a Changing City, that was published by New York University Press, won the Everett Family Foundation Prize for the best book in Jewish history from the Jewish Book Council. Professor Gurock is an elected fellow of the American Academy of Jewish Research and the New York Academy of History. And he has been designated by the Association for Jewish Studies as Distinguished Lecturer. His most recent book, Parkchester, A Bronx Tale of Race and Ethnicity, was published in 2019 by New York University Press. Now, his title for this afternoon is American Jewry's Contemporary Scorecard, Anti-Semitism and Tolerance in the United States. So I will now turn off my video and my audio so we can all listen to Professor Gurock. Thereafter, we are going to open it up to conversation with the audience. Please submit your question through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And Lisa Kaplan will present the questions to Professor Gurock. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Chava. It's a pleasure to be here. I wish I was in warm Arizona rather than in cold New York, but we all have to make accommodations given the realities of the time. I also just had the pleasure of meeting John Eckstein. I want the Eckstein family to know that Phoenix Jewish News and the Jewish Historical Society of your region are so very important to us as professional historians, because what you people do often provides the spade work for us as professional historians. And it's a wonderful synergy between our local historical societies and the National American Jewish Historical Society. And I had the privilege of being the chair of their academic council for 6 years back in the turn of the millennium. Most of the some 150 people who are listening to this talk don't know me personally, but I want you to know that my professional ethic when I get an invitation is to begin working on my speech, on my paper, many, many months before I actually do that. That's how I go about doing things. I like to get ahead of the curve. So several months ago, I started cobbling together my notes for this presentation. And here's what I was planning on saying. I was going to say that unfortunately at present, American Jews are going through a difficult patch as far as anti-Semitism is concerned. And I would have noted Charlottesville, Pittsburgh, Poway, code words that are etched in our memories as hatred turned to violence. And I was going to say having said that, there was some good news attached to this, that when we had these outbreaks of anti-Semitism, the police departments stood up on behalf of Jews. I was warned by the fact that in Pittsburgh, the Muslim community was supportive of Jews in that area. And my message was going to be that as a Jew and as a historian, that I have guarded optimism about our future position in this country, and talk to you about how far we have come in terms of general acceptance of Jews in this country. The other thing I was going to say is, sure to note, the decline in support for Israel in certain segments of this country, the decline in support, notwithstanding which government is in power in Israel, is often within the Jewish community itself. My concern is with those who deny the very existence of Israel, not their concern with a particular government. The metaphor I was going to use that John and Chava noted is that one of my interests, besides being an urban historian and a student of religion, is that I'm very interested in the intersection of Judaism and athleticism within the United States, what I call my sports talk, which really isn't about sports. And truth be told, I would talk about what I say, Joe Lieberman in sneakers. The fact that Jews are accepted in terms of American sports and what that means in terms of our larger acceptance in America. Many, many years ago, when I was still a graduate student at Columbia, I had the privilege of studying with a great African-American historian named Nathan Huggins, who used to say, for minority groups in America, wars and sports are community-defining situations. If you're allowed to play for your country or your city or your team or your borough or fight for your country, it is an important moment in time in terms of your acceptance of that group within America. And of course, as an African-American, he was keen to mention, of course, that the beginnings of the civil rights movement in this country can be dated from the time that Jack Roosevelt Robinson was allowed to play Major League Baseball. What I was going to tell you about is a very unusual but very nice story. And that is 2 years ago, a strange, unexpected event took place at my home university, Yeshiva University. And that is our basketball team qualified for the NCAA Division III championship. Now, the NCAA is one of the great institutions of America. It represents the WASP establishment to a great extent. And Yeshiva qualified because we happened to have a good team. Now, at the university, people were agog by the fact they were doing so well in sports. But for me, the interesting part was that we were scheduled to play a game, our opening game, on Friday night. And the NCAA, in its wisdom, said the game does not have to take place on the Jewish Sabbath. It can take place Friday morning. We played the game and we lost. But the significance was that this WASP establishment was accepting of our religious protocols, in my case, as an Orthodox Jew. And it wasn't a Jewish story, because there's another university in this country with baseball team with a Y on the baseball hat, and that's Brigham Young. Brigham Young is a Mormon school, and they had a similar issue where the NCAA said, yes, you don't have to play on your Sabbath. And I started thinking about Chariots of Fire, that great movie about Harold Abrahams and the Olympics, and the desire on the part of the missionary not to play on his Sabbath. So this seemed to me to be a very important indicator of how accepted Jews and other minorities are within America, at least religious minorities. I hope you don't feel that this sports reference is so obscure. I'm going to return to the sports in a few moments, but that's not going to be the focus of my talk this evening. Needless to say, after January 6th, I was required to rewrite this speech several times. And here is my latest iteration that I began writing in the afternoon of January 20th, after the inauguration of Joe Biden as President of the United States. I was very pleased, I'm sure we all were, that the inauguration went off without incident. And I felt his speech, at least for the moment, was an uplifting moment where he talked about the possibility of the administration bringing people together. I shan't get into the internal dynamics of politics at this point, but that has to be said. So where do I stand now? I'm not sure if my optimism that I would have expressed extensively several months ago has been shattered, but it certainly has been challenged. To state the obvious, as an American, I was outraged that our capital was invaded. As a Jew, I was horrified that a fellow wore a Camp Auschwitz sweatshirt, indicating to me how far QAnon has gone. When I spoke about anti-Semitism years ago, I said, you know what? They're in Wyoming, they're in Montana, they're not here. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention my shock, my sadness, my anger, that an Orthodox Jew, the son of a Brooklyn judge, was among the insurrectionists on January 6th. What in the world was he thinking about? So the question before us in this lecture is, to what extent right now have we descended in our status and position in America to an earlier time in our history when we were extremely marginal and vulnerable? Now, to be sure, historians cannot predict the future. I sometimes quip that we leave that to the sociologists to do that sort of thing. But maybe a dose of history will help us understand where we were and where we're going today. So to understand this, I'm going to take you back quickly through American Jewish history, looking at some of the major milestones, negative milestones in terms of our acceptance in this country, with a particular focus on what life was like before the Second World War. And you'll see at some points, I'll throw in some sports metaphors, but that's not the entire story. a half-an-hour history of anti-Semitism while sitting on one leg here in beautiful Bronx, New York. Anti-Semitism existed from the start of the American Jewish experience. The first event in American Jewish history took place in 1654. Some of you may know this, when the first 23 Jews arrived in New Amsterdam, and Peter Stuyvesant, the governor of this small colony, did not want them to be admitted to the area. And he said, in classic religious anti-Semitic terms, they are blasphemers of the name of Christ. And at the same time, they are usurers, which means Jews had money. And also they may become a public charge upon the community. So there you have it. Jews can be both rich and poor simultaneously. Fortunately for us, the Dutch West Indies Company overruled Stuyvesant and said these Jews can settle so long as they don't become a public charge. But the most significant piece of the story for me, beyond this well-known tale, is that in 1654, not only did Peter Stuyvesant not want Jews in the colony, but he said, if we allow Jews, next thing you know, we'll have papists, Catholics, and Lutherans in this country. He wanted a homogeneous society. My point is that very often in American Jewish history, those who don't like us or who hate us don't like other people as well, and like or hate African Americans even more than they do Jews. Another example during this early period, what I call emancipation anti-Semitism, where feelings toward Jews are submerged beneath feelings about other groups who are far more problematic in the eyes of the majority population. I'll just mention two states. Maryland, Mary's Land, a Catholic colony, has a Toleration Act in 1649 that says anyone who publicly denies the Trinitarian Christianity could be liable to the death sentence. Now, this wasn't designed to Jews. They want a homogeneous colony. They don't want dissenters. They don't want agnostics. They don't want Unitarians in their colony. Similarly, up north, when you go to New England, Jews are also not allowed in because they want a homogeneous colony. And in fact, when we look at prejudice against minority groups in America, white minority groups in America, there's far more anti-Catholicism in America than anti-Semitism. To give you one example, in 1776, the draft Constitution of New York State says that anyone can be a citizen. I should say anyone who is male, land-owning citizen, but put that aside, so long as that person gives up any allegiance to any foreign power, ecclesiastical or temporal. Now, under that rubric, Jews could sign on, right? We had no state, we had no ecclesiastical power. It was designed to prejudice against Catholics in this country. In the 19th century, the Know Nothing Party was anti-Catholic. Abolitionists didn't like Jews. Abolitionists felt Jews should have a special responsibility in terms of abolition, and they were chagrined that Jews did not respond appropriately. During the Civil War, and I shan't go into any of the details, most of you may know this, chaplaincy, Grant's Order Number 11, in both instances, there's anti-Semitism. It was only based on that particular moment in time. In the 1880s, the populists come on the scene, agrarian radicals, and you begin to see the imagery of Jewish conspiracy. 1896, William Jennings Bryan, who runs for president of the United States 3 times, delivers a speech in Madison Square Garden in New York, where he says, "Do not crucify mankind again on a cross of gold." But there's interesting ambivalence on the part of the populists that I should mention. They are located primarily in Wisconsin, in Minnesota, in the Dakotas, to some extent in Ohio. They gain control of state legislatures. They have Jews under their control. And they're able to make a distinction between, I hate to say this, between the Jews they know and those obnoxious Jews in New York who are seen as tied to the gold standard that they want to see abolished. 1915, the Leo Frank case, the one example we have of the lynching of a Jew. He has several things going against him which undermined his life ultimately. He was a Jew, he was a Northerner, he was accused of a sex crime, and of course he's lynched. But it's not until after World War I that anti-Semitism becomes a problem on so many fronts. In 1921, and then in 1924, a 40-year battle against immigration closes the gates of immigration. Restrictionists, nativists are able to evoke the image of a bearded Bolshevik with a bomb, one of these round bombs with a wick on one hand and a copy of Karl Marx's writings on the other hand, identifying the Jews with left radicalism. And by the way, these laws remain on the books till 1965. And one of the tragic and odious aspects of these laws that after World War II, it was easier for former Nazis to get into this country, particularly if they were good with aeronautics and bombs like Werner von Braun, than their victims. It's not until Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1965 that the laws are changed. So in the 1920s, Jews now see themselves being marginalized through these immigration laws, which will not change. And then we have Henry Ford and the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, the image of an international conspiracy destroying the real America, undermining the mores of America. And I will give you a sports metaphor. In 1919, there's a Black Sox scandal. Are Jews involved in that Black Sox scandal? The answer is yes, they're not alone. Henry Ford picks up on this and says the following: what is baseball? Baseball is our national pastime. It's a beautiful game played out in a warm summer afternoon out in the field. Jews don't play those games. They want to control it. They bring the game to the city where Jews reside. And what do? They corrupt it. And he turns to the protocols for evidence along those lines. America is changing, and Jews are playing a role in this sort of transformation, which is injurious to the real America. Does it sound familiar? It has resonance today, but it dates back to that time period. There's a real irony about Henry Ford. Through the mass-produced automobile, no man changed America more than Henry Ford. There's a wonderful sociological study that was done of Muncie, Indiana in the 1920s called Middletown. And in that book, they studied the mores of old people and young people in that city at that point. And they point out that, because of the automobile, dating patterns have changed. Young people are not courting one another and the back steps of people's homes. They're getting into Ford cars and going to drive-in movies and a variety of other types of things. So Henry Ford's at the forefront of pushing this idea of conspiracy, of Jews undermining America, changing America negatively for the future. And then we have the Ku Klux Klan in the city. My dissertation father, Kenneth T. Jackson, the greatest urban historian in America, did his first book called The KKK in the City, in which he pointed out that in the 1920s, the Klan, which began in the South, moves to the city, moves to Rust Belt areas, and is anti-Catholic and anti-Jewish. To just continue this diatribe about how bad things were back then, in the 1930s, we have Father Coughlin linking Jews with communism. and interventionism, and accuses Jews of job stealing away from real Americans. In my home city of New York and elsewhere, there are pitched fights in the cities between Irish Americans and Jews as he puts one ethnic group against another. And in fact, interestingly enough, in New York, there's more anti-Semitism provoked by Coughlin than among the Irish, than among the Germans who are influenced from what's going on in Berlin. I want to turn back to sports for a moment and say a word about 1934, Hank Greenberg and Judaism and the pressure that's placed on him to play on Yom Kippur. Some of you know the story, but listen to my way of telling it. In 1934, Greenberg, who parenthetically played handball with my mother in the Bronx before he became a major league star, is the greatest Jewish player of his time. And the pennant race is coming to a conclusion. And the question is, will he play on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? And he's pressured by his owner, by his manager, and says, listen, you have an obligation. You have an obligation to your community to play on that day. At the end of the day, Greenberg plays on Rosh Hashanah. He doesn't play on Yom Kippur. But for me, the interesting thing is, if you want to understand what Jewish life is like in Detroit, a very anti-Semitic city, look, it's a town which has Ford in the suburb, Coughlin in the suburb, the Klan within the city. It's a very, very difficult time for Jews. And of course, you know, things get brighter. In 1965, Sandy Koufax decides that he will not play on Yom Kippur, and a more cultural, pluralistic America understands that a Jew might want to absent himself from playing on his holiest day. And some of you may know the story. You know, I've told this story all over the world, and there are about 150 people listening to me. And if you chuckle when I tell you the story, I won't be able to hear it, but chuckle when you hear the story. He doesn't pitch. His roommate, Don Drysdale, pitches in his stead, and Drysdale pitches very poorly. And Walter Alston comes out to the mound, who's his manager, and takes the ball from him. And as Drysdale leaves the scene, he expresses the classic line of Jewish history. He says, "Skipper, I bet you wish today I was also a Jew, because if he was a Jew, perhaps he wouldn't be playing on Yom Kippur." Very difficult times for Jews in the 1930s. Klan, conspiracy, anti-Semitism is rampant. And now we go to the international scene in 1936. And many of you know where I'm going. The 1930, every 2 years now or every 4 years, a country gets an opportunity to strut itself, show itself to the world. And in 1936, the Berlin Games take place. There is some protest led by Jews on the left for the most part, against these games, but the games take place. Avery Brundage is the head of the American Olympic Committee. And you probably know the story, some of you. He does not want Jews to embarrass Adolf Hitler by competing in a signature event during the Olympics. So he and some others on the Olympic leadership, this was preserved in 1936, say that Marty Glickman, many of you may know of Marty Glickman as the great sportscaster of his time, and Sam Stoller cannot run in the 4x100 meter race. Wars and sports defined community. If you will, it is a pre-Holocaust story of the world not being interested in the fate of the Jews. Now, by the way, as you probably know, Jesse Owens runs and wins his gold medals. What's the difference? Well, the Nazis project Owens as being a slave who's working for his white masters, garnering medals for America. After the Olympics, when the team returns to New York, they are feted at Waldorf Astoria, and Jesse Owens, who's the hero of that Olympics, is allowed to be at the dinner. However, he must go up the back freight elevator to get the main ballroom. Wars and sports define society. But let me go on and say more about how difficult things were for Jews back in the day to contextualize where we are today. In the halls of Congress, Mississippi Senator Theodore Bilbo delivers a 3-hour diatribe against Negroes and kike Jews who are out to destroy America. Though he admits that some of his best friends in Mississippi are Jews, and Jesus Christ, of course, was a Jew, America has to be on guard against the kike Jews, especially those in New York. Of course, Bilbo dies in 1947 of tongue cancer, which may be some sort of divine interference in his particular life. And then in 1938, the DIES Commission, D-I-E-S Commission, identifies 138 different anti-Semitic groups in America, including the Silver Shirts of William Paley, who establishes organizations. Since they're brown shirts and they're black shirts in Europe, he wants silver shirts within America. You have the German-American Bund, which, by the way, also operates in Detroit, to add that to the list, and other domestic operatives in Rust Belt states. Again, and they're not silenced by the government until World War II. So if you're listening to this, it may sound that what I'm saying is that I'm making a case for history repeating itself in our own day. Conspiracy, anti-Semitism, riots of this sort, Congress people, etc. However, there are fundamental differences. And here's where I begin to offer some words of consolation and perhaps reassurance to American Jews. First of all, public opinion polls. During the 1930s, in order to sell magazines, Fortune magazine begins to publish public opinion polls about how Americans feel about Jews, about Jewish power, about Jewish presence in America. Before I give you these results, let me just say two things about these polls. One of the greatnesses of America, going back to the early emancipation, is that very often Jews are not in the center of the discussion of what sort of country we want to have. This is a very terrible joke, which I'm going to tell you, that anti-Semites and Jews often have one thing in common. They see Jews as in the center of all activities. But back in the day, in the 18th century and 19th century, Jews are insignificant. But now Fortune magazine's forget about what the answers are going to be. Fortune magazine's asking questions about where do Jews fit in? Are Jews too powerful? Are Jews too prevalent within the United States? And close to half of Americans in 1938 say the Jews have too much power in America. Today, last 10 years, we lived through recessions. We lived through downturns in the economy. There are Jewish names are part of that story of America, but recessions, depressions, difficult times have not been blamed on the Jews by the vast majority of Americans. I don't know what this group feels about Jonathan Pollard. Jonathan Pollard is now living in Israel. Some American Jews see him as a hero. I don't. Some people see him as a villain. But for me as a historian, the important thing about Pollard was and is that whatever he did with reference to America was not blamed on the Jews as a group. So in terms of the mind of America, the vast majority of Americans do not see Jews in a negative way. Social anti-Semitism, jobs, housing, vacations, education, medical schools. Back in the day, Jews were not wanted. Many of you remember the Academy Award-winning film, Gentleman's Agreement in 1947. The situation is very different today. I wish to tell you a personal story, which I hope you'll find droll. In 2005, Cornell University, the Jewish community in Cornell University, let me stop for a second. Cornell University had a long history of being restrictionist towards Jews. It was a very anti-Semitic community back in the day. But the Jewish community had a Shabbaton, a retreat weekend to commemorate 350 years of Jews living in America. And I was one of the speakers there. There were too many speakers, and I was one of the speakers. And the speeches went on and on. Cornell University has the #1 school of hotel management in the United States. And they have a laboratory. They have a laboratory called the Hilton Hotel. Now, the first major event in anti-Semitism, of social anti-Semitism, took place in 1877, where Joseph Seligman, who was the 19th century Jewish equivalent, confidant of president, great financier, would be the 19th century version of, I don't know, Henry Kissinger, maybe Joe Lieberman, is turned away by the Hiltons because they don't want Jews to be part of their, as they define, community. So to finish the story, when we walked back to the hotel Friday night, and some of the participants are Orthodox Jews, they don't use the elevators or the keys, the electronic keys that let people into the rooms. A whole bunch of lovely, well-dressed young men, young women are waiting to help Jewish people get into their rooms. So me being me, I asked this kid, one of these kids, how do you feel about being stationed at the elevator for X number of hours to facilitate Orthodox Jews getting upstairs? And this young woman says to me, I think it's great. I said, great, why? She said, because when I graduate Cornell, I can put on my resume that among my special talents that I know how to deal with an Orthodox weekend. When I heard that, I said to myself, Baron Hilton is turning over in his grave. Things have changed. Jews are accepted almost everywhere. That is a social reality that has not changed. Now, there are problems on university campuses. I understand that you spent an entire seminar on that sort of thing. And very often, let me be clear, one need not be an advocate for any particular Israeli government, but questioning the legitimacy of Israel is highly problematic. And sadly, to my point of view, Jews are often in the forefront of those who attempt to legitimize anti-Israeli feeling. To continue, there are more Jews in public office today than ever before. In 1958, when polled, 62% of Americans said they'd be willing to vote for a Jewish candidate. By 2019, the number went up to 91%. And may I betray some of my own politics? In Georgia, the day before January 6th, a Jew and a Black were both elected to the Senate, Asroff and Warner. Now, some Jews and some Blacks applauded this merger, hoping for better improvement of Jewish-Black relations. For me, the interesting point is the Jewishness of Asroff was hardly in play. These politicians can and should stand up for us and for everyone of goodwill. And one of the issues of Jewish response in an earlier period was the reluctance of Jewish leaders within Congress, within the Senate, to push for Jewish concerns. So I say to you, there is no reason to despair. My point is that complacency or fear about anti-Semitism must be avoided. But we are still living in a blessed land. And at the end of the day, the larger issue for us as Jews, the greater challenge for us as Jews, while we should fight anti-Semitism in every way, shape, or form, is the challenge of the fact that we are accepted so very, very much. How do you remain Jewish? My last sports metaphor, ladies and gentlemen, in 2004, Sean Green, who I believe played in Arizona, he also played for the Dodgers, couldn't decide whether to play on Yom Kippur. The Dodger management said to him, "We want no part of this decision. You make up your mind for yourself." Although one evangelical radio host said that maybe he could resolve his problem by accepting Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior. He decides to play on Kol Nidre night. And I wish I could say he struck out 4 times. Turns out he hit the winning home run, so there was no divine intervention here or punishment was visited upon him. Still, it evokes the consummate problem for American Jewish history. How do we retain our identity in an environment of acceptance? Anti-Semitism has to be fought, but our fate is not in our hands as far as anti-Semitism is concerned, but our larger concern is communal survival, which leads me finally to the dicey question of how we survive as a community and its historical context. And I want to focus on intermarriage for a moment. And as someone who teaches at Yeshiva University, this may astound you where I'm coming from. It is among the most controversial points. I am not an advocate for intermarriage. Endogamy is to be applauded. But the reality is that Jews and Gentiles are marrying each other. As of 2013, 58% of Jews are intermarrying with Christians, and perhaps this may contribute to the 91% of Americans who support a Jewish candidate. They all have a Jew in their family. You know, in 2016, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump only had one thing in common. They both had son-in-laws who had been in the White House. And of course, Jared Kushner ended up in the White House. In 2021, each one of Joe Biden's surviving children, as well as Bo's widow, are married to Jews. And we have our first gentleman, Emhoff, who is the first gentleman in Washington. Secondly, those people who intermarry are not rejecting of Judaism. Back in the day, when a Jew married a Christian, more often than not, they identified with a numerically dominant group. A recent Pew study indicated that close to 1/2 of intermarried families are raising their children as Jews. They want to be part of us. And the question for us is, how can we open a tent for them, for all those people who want in? And if you think this is new, one last historical context: American Jews have never been sure what to do with the intermarried couple. An example, in New York, in the 18th century, one of the most prominent families was the Franks family. And in fact, the most articulate Jewish woman of that era was Abigail Franks. In fact, she kept a diary of letters that she wrote to her children. And 2 of her children intermarried. Philip Franks married Oliver Delancey of Delancey fame, and her son David married a Christian in Philadelphia. But David wanted to be part of the Jewish community, as did his wife. So we have an interesting document in the family Bible that Mrs. Franks kept, which Christians often do. She had a notation of the birth of a child that took place on Good Friday that corresponded with Purim. Now, rarely does Purim take place on a Friday, but strangely enough, 5 days from now will take place in 2021. Purim and Good Friday living together. Congregational protocols. Congregations are not sure whether an intermarried Jew can be a member. and they keep changing their minds. In the 1840s, in New Orleans, there's a special area set aside for Gentile spouses. So the largest question for us as American Jews at this point is, how do we bring people in? Do we want them in? That's the challenge for the coming generations. Can non-Jews take part as members? Can they have roles and rituals that they can partake? This is an interdenominational issue. Reform, conservative, and Reconstructionists have gone a long way towards opening the tent. It's even an issue for Orthodoxy. What do you do with the David Franks of today? An openness towards conversion. I will close by quoting a line from a historian who influenced all of us. And I know Professor Samuelson has a particular interest in this historian because she helped run a conference in Poland 2 years ago in memory and in honor of Salo W. Baron. And if I'm not mistaken, this university has an award, a Baron Award, for the best dissertation done in Jewish studies every year. I hope I'm correct. I think I'm correct. Chava's nodding her head affirmatively. So among the many, many books and articles he wrote, he edited a book called Steeled by Adversity. Bronx accent, steeled, S-T-E-E-L-E-D, steeled by adversity. And when asked what was the adversity that Jews were steeled together in the United States, his answer was, it's the adversity of acceptance and freedom. So my bottom line to you is, even as we should be concerned with anti-Semitism and fight back with the myriad of organizations against anti-Semitism, the larger problem for us as American Jews, whatever our religious disposition is within the Jewish tent, is how we survive as a Jewish community. So that's my story on anti-Semitism. And if there are questions, I will be glad to answer them. Liese is in charge of that. Thank you very much. And if this was an audience, I'd wait for the applause, but I don't know how that plays with 149 people listening. So thank you very much. And the floor is now open for questions, comments, criticisms as we move along. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. That was wonderful. Could you reflect a little bit about anti-Semitism on the right, on the left, specifically in the Black community and Muslim community, and maybe talk a little bit about that today specifically?
Sure. Black Lives Matter is not a unified organization. There's no question that there are elements within Black Lives Matter that have some anti-Semitic overtones to what they do. But from my way of thinking, there's so much more to that movement that Jews, liberal Jews and Jews who are concerned can relate to, namely things like not, God forbid, I'm going to say this properly, not defunding the police, but understanding that police have a variety of roles that Jews and others should relate to in terms of community organization, sensitivity, and things of that sort. So you have that problem within the African-American community. And if I had time, and I may in a different venue talk about Black-Jewish relations, the way I look at this is there's never one unified voice among African-Americans and no unified voice among Jews on the question of race, which goes back to really the beginnings of the United States. As far as anti-Semitism on the left is concerned, I'll put my cards on the table. I'm very concerned about the implications of BDS with reference to the survival of the state of Israel. And I hope I made myself clear. And I'm happy to repeat myself for clarification. That is, one, I'm not concerned with people being critical of a particular administration in the state of Israel. I'll put some other cards on the table. I'm no great fan of the particular government in the state of Israel. So criticism of Israel is legitimate and is welcome, And we as American Jews have a right to speak out and deal with that issue. But when that turns to delegitimizing the actual existence of the state of Israel, that's where I personally part company with that sort of thing. And I'm concerned when on university campuses, people who talk about Israel in positive terms are silenced by people who want to hear only one version of what's going on. My work is constantly looking for diversity of thought and action on that score. So yes, anti-Semitism on the right, anti-Semitism on the left. You know, when the ADL published its statistics on anti-Semitism today, they said, this is the worst it's been since 1968. And I'm wondering what was going on in terms of 1968 that evoked this sort of anti-Semitism. This was the year where Bobby was killed, where Dr. King was killed, right? Tet Offensive, Vietnam War. So I'm struggling with that in terms of understanding it. All I'm saying is there was critique of Jews from the left and from the right, and in both instances should be responded to, but responded to with understanding that I believe we have larger problems, and that is, are we going to survive? You know, I could be wrong, but I'm not. Before World War II, when the Mussolini government, you'll see where I'm going with this, the Mussolini government was pressured by Berlin to evoke their version of the Nuremberg laws. In the town of Trieste, where 70% of the Jews had intermarried, there was rejection of this because everyone had a Jewish relative. Now, I'm not, I want to be clear, I'm not an advocate for intermarriage. What I am suggesting is that the fact that Jews and Gentiles in a matrimonial sense are very close to one another is one of our protections. But the bigger question is, what does that mean in terms of Jewish survival? I have to tell you, I've come a long way in this regard. I used to talk about intermarriage being so negative, but now I understand, and I'm suggesting in this talk, and perhaps it's somewhat controversial, that as much as we want endogamy on the part of Jews, the fact of the matter is we have to deal with the reality that people are knocking on our doors and want to be in, and how do we find ways of bringing people in and maintaining ourselves as a community, whether it's through conversion or even a situation where the Gentile grandparents of a bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah boy or girl, what role can they play within Jewish life without becoming Jewish? So again, the leitmotif of my work is really how we're going to survive as a community. So thank you, Lisa, for that question.
Great. The next, it's not a question, it's a comment, and it's actually from Shoshana Tanser. Shoshana is Baron's daughter.
Right.
So she happens to be on the call. She's on our board. She is on the call. And she just wanted to make a comment that her dad was frequently questioned as to how he could think that acceptance was the greatest danger for the survival of American Jewry. And I thought you could maybe reflect on that a little bit.
Well, again, the adversity is the adversity of freedom. How do you cope in a world where Jews are accepted and have the possibility of drifting away? When Baron looked early on at the emancipation saga of American Jews, what he emphasized was emancipation through inadvertence. It just happens. It just happens without the great debates over whether Jews can fit in, which in some respects was a preservative for Jewish identity. In America, it happens so smoothly that the smoothness can lead to people drift away. I'm proud to say that I'm a student of Baron. I guess we're all students of Baron. My teacher of American Jewish history was Naomi W. Cohen, who was one of the, who was a Barone student. I don't want to, I'll say she's the wife of Gerson Cohen, but that shouldn't diminish her. Naomi Cohen was one of the first women who occupied, who taught American Jewish history. It took a while for her to gain acceptance, and she was a Barone student. And he was an eminence at Columbia. Eugene Clay has a question. How do you explain the paradox of, I can't read the rest of it. One second. That President Trump, who is certainly strongly supportive of Israel as Jewish family, attracts anti-Semitic supporters, censors the man in the Auschwitz T-shirt. You know, I'm not sure I can look inside the mind of these of diseased people, to tell you the truth. Okay, I think people who wear the Auschwitz T-shirt and the QAnon people are so hung up on so many other issues that, frankly, the issue of where Jews fit in is marginal. They're more against Latinos and blacks and other types of people than Jews, which is sort of interesting. So I hope that among Linda Cohen, among Reformed Jews, I see congregations welcoming whether or not the Gentile partner converts or not. I have many in my family who are intermarried, and there have been no issues here. I believe the problem lies with the Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox communities. Well, it's not with the ultra-Orthodox community because there's relatively little intermarriage there, although they have people who drift away and it's not studied very much. Among the problem with the Orthodox is, and it dates back to the colonial period. You know, one of the things I say in my classes is that there's no orthodoxy until the end of the 18th century. And then I say to the students, don't put in the headline, the school newspaper, Gurock says there's no orthodoxy. There's no term for orthodoxy. But the synagogues in America are always Orthodox. And the question was, what do you do with the Jewish member, of an intermarriage? And that's one of the dilemmas for Orthodox Judaism today. And the other issue is, to what extent can you encourage conversion to Judaism without undercutting the strictures of Orthodoxy? So you're right, the problem lies with Orthodox because people who think that intermarried Jews are knocking only on the doors of Reform, Reconstruction, and Conservative Judaism are kidding themselves. It may not take place in Borough Park, but it takes place in Riverdale, and I imagine it takes place in Phoenix and Tucson and all over the country. You're 100% right. Ariel Rosenberg, I have to disagree. The conspiracy theorists all believe that Jews are behind all the world's ills, and the hatred they have for other marginalized communities is channeled through anti-Semitism. Nothing new, Ariel, nothing new as far as that's concerned. But the conspiracy theorists, and you may know because you've been studying this very closely, and we'll hear more from you later on. The conspiracy theorists, the degree that anti-Semitism is on the front page of their activities maybe not be nearly as powerful as these other types of movements. So that's my response to that. Are there any other questions? Maybe we should wrap it up and move on. Chava, please.
Ave, you're muted.
Unmute, please.
Yeah. My question would be this. What is your position on Jews who actually support, quote unquote, American nationhood? I didn't invent that term. And it's a particular person in the previous administration who actually implemented a particular policy, which is very much anti-immigration policy. In other words, a nativist policy against various groups. So what should be the Jewish community or your particular position on that kind of posture?
Well, I think Miller's case is, you didn't want to mention, Miller's case is very, very sad, very sad. He has no understanding of what Jewish history in America was, and to take that sort of position is a very sad statement of where he stands on these types of things. The issue is more with him than with us. I'm not suggesting that he should be read out of the Jewish community, although some of his relatives have. But that's one of the dilemmas of our time. John, did you have a question? Unmute yourself, please.
Yes, thank you. I very much enjoyed your talk today. If you had to list the top 5 reasons today for anti-Semitism, what would be the most important number 1 and go down to number 5?
I'm not sure there are 5, but there's
Your top 5.
There's anti-Israel anti-Semitism. There is this ideological anti-Semitism of QAnon, which I'm suggesting, I can't give you 5, which I'm suggesting is picking up a trope that goes back to the 1920s. I think those are the two origins. But my point is, it has not invaded the social acceptance of Jews by the vast majority of Americans. Now, I know if you look at Arizona back in the day, and there may be some places where Jews are not wanted, but when your parents came to Arizona, it was a very, very different situation. The type of anti-Semitism that Jews face is in their own lives is not, at least to this point, again, can't predict the future, is not the ideological anti-Semitism, but the fact that social anti-Semitism has retreated almost completely in this country. We can go everywhere. Now, it may have something to do with the fact of Jews having economic power in this country. That might be part of the stories.
What role does the belief that Jews were responsible for the killing of Christ play today in terms of anti-Semitism? And what role do churches or other religions impart that belief to their congregants?
Well, although the deicide, I want to say several things. One of the things that I discovered in studying an Irish and Jewish neighborhood in my home borough of the Bronx is how, and Jews don't often notice this, is the filtering down of feelings about Jews after Vatican II, in terms of how Jews and Judaism were taught in Catholic schools and churches and the like. And it's now 50 years or more since that sort of thing. As far as Christ killing is concerned, I don't think it's nearly as important ideologically as the idea that Jews are, those who hate us are destroying an ideal society. That's for sure. That's for sure. Thank you, Jeffrey Cohen, for what he wrote about the event. Okay. I don't know if I'm a national treasure, but I certainly am a legend in my own mind. So I think we're moving on to something else, Lisa.
Well, we're done. I just wanted to thank you on behalf of ASU Jewish Studies and myself and Hava and John for your wonderful lecture and the great questions that you answered. So thank you so much.
And let me say one more word beyond the wonderful event right now. I remind you that next Sunday, we have a big conference on Judaism and climate change. We're going to look at it from scientific, theological, and ethical perspectives. You all have references to it on the website of Jewish Studies. So please join us and learn more on a very different, but no less challenging issue. So thank you, Professor Gurock, and thank you to all of you who have joined us this afternoon.